Kia ora, everybody. We'll make a start. Thanks, Taff. I'll hand straight to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Kia ora, councillors. So today we're bringing back the draft public statement policy that we talked to you a bit about at the end of last year, and quite a few months have gone past since we had the conversation. And it was when we weren't in the chamber, we were in the room next door. And you gave us some feedback around some of the issues that you got with the policy in terms of what it was trying to achieve, and then some of the wording and things. So this is just bringing it back now to where we've got to. So if it's all right with you, Craig, I'm not going to go back over the first lot of slides. I'll take those as read, that people have got that information and the recap there, but then just flick straight to some of the unresolved issues and things that we still need to do today. So thank you.
I just had a thought too, because some councillors just asked about, and I know it's Lisa or David down there, about we've got a workshop. I couldn't remember the exact date. We've got a workshop on the other parts of the code of conduct. Is it really soon? Next week. There you go. So just so everyone knows, like, this is just a precursor to that as well, and that's coming next week. So kia ora. Thanks, Steph.
Cool. Thanks, Craig. So we do want to just cover off the alignment with the code of conduct review, and then resolving the outstanding questions today. So I'm going to go over these ones unless anybody's got any particular questions on those, and get straight to the guidance sought today, if that's okay with councillors. So we want to have a look at, is the structure right? So having a code of conduct with less wording in it, jumping to or linking to a policy, and then the policy having supporting guidelines. Does that work for councillors in this, and will it help you hold each other to account to the extent that you wish to around the public statement piece? Noting that the policies will be on a regular cycle. So those of you who are on audit and risk committee will know that there's a regular cycle of those policy reviews coming through, and then the guidelines can be updated at any point. So we'll come to that bit. Does the wording now meet the purpose, given the feedback that you gave us at the end of last year? And does the framework allow for the freedom of an expression of ideas by councillors, while also ensuring that the purpose of the policy can be met and that you can operate in a safe space? So that was a bit of the tension that came up at the end of last year. Then just want to touch very briefly on the spokespeople and the different roles, because obviously there's a lot of grey in terms of who would be speaking on different things. And then, is there sufficient information and guidance to help you around the safety? That came up a bit when we talked about it last year as well. Is that, are we keeping you and the constituents safe? And then anything else that you wanted to raise. So the first bit is around the structure. So really just wanting some overall feedback that, does this work for you as a concept, that we take some wording out of the code of conduct, because at the moment the code of conduct tries to kind of be the policy as well, and link through to the policy on the basis that, as I said, we can review the policy and the guidelines can shift any time something changes in best practice or councillors raise something.
All happy to take feedback on that, councillors. Yep, Claire.
I did send an email in, which I've now just forwarded to Taff so she can see it, around the draft per se as it's currently written. I think there's some things in there that could perhaps help clarify things, and I would like to see the purpose shifted to right to the front of the actual document, because otherwise you're reading it and you're thinking, well, what the hell am I reading this for? So if you put the purpose first and then put your introduction paros there, and you might have to change that, obviously. I've also just a couple of edits around perhaps some of the wording around the purpose, where we say here, aligned with their organisational position and serve rather than confuse the community. I think we just say, we need to actually think about how we actually are using that and positively reframe it. Couple of other edits there, but they're reasonably minor. And the other thing, I think that we just need to be quite all-encompassing, particularly when we go to page 5 and we talk about who the spokespeople are, and we talk about broadcast media. Well, media is now far wider than broadcast, so I've suggested perhaps just using news media, because anything that you read now is like news, whether it's digital, social media, whatever. That's how people are taking it in. So
Thank you. And actually, one of my team picked up on that as well, because we talk about broadcast versus narrowcast as opposed to broadcasting, as in radio. And they said that's not that clear, because that sounds like broadcast as in TV and radio, not as in going wide versus going narrow. So, yeah, they somebody's picked that one up for me. Thank you, Claire. Sorry, I think you've lost your button.
Sorry. Under the, on page 7, where we've got the guidelines for council use of social media, the first bullet point's quite, I think, quite important, around where we say, not making any comment that's not already public. I think that needs to actually also go into the media section that we've got here as well. So I think it could be, the content of that could be repeated. But I think that if you change those little edits and the sense of it, the structure of that's fine, given that we're going to be looking at the code of conduct.
Thanks, Claire. In terms of the structure around taking it out of the code of conduct, I think that is a good idea, because the code of conduct otherwise is really wordy. So you can take it out and refer to it. So are people reasonably comfortable with that idea, to take all those words out of the code of conduct and refer to a separate policy? And we can debate the policy later, but I think that's what you're asking, ATAF. Like, what is that the right thing to do? People happy with that? I personally am supportive of that. Yeah. Grant, you got a question, Mark?
Yeah. Well, obviously this code of conduct thing is coming next week, and so
So as you'll note next, just so we're clear, there's some wording that would be proposed in the code of conduct to refer to the policy. That's coming up in our next little bit that Taft's going to introduce. What we're just asking now is the idea of moving those words out of the code of conduct and referring to a policy. Are people reasonably comfortable with that? The words are still there; they're just not in the code of conduct. I suppose the pro of that is that you can amend the policy a bit easier than you can amend the code of conduct. So as things change, you can change that policy. So yeah.
I've just got one question around the code of conduct needs 75% of the council to amend. Am I correct in that? Sorry, I think
you got some shaking heads. I can't remember, but
it is, yeah. But the policy would only need a majority of the council. So I'm just wondering around I think you know what I'm saying. I just don't know how to articulate what I'm trying to say. I'm just thinking from a policy, and the weighting a policy has just from a simple majority versus a code of conduct and a super majority. I just wonder if you've thought about that. And I think we should think about that as well.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Theon. Vicky?
I'm just thinking in terms of, so referring to a policy makes sense, and sort of keeping them packaged up into simple to read and so on. No point repeating. But I think I think it's helpful, nevertheless, to have them compiled into one document, so that it's all in one place. Is that the intent? I mean, you might be an appendix, or it might be that you've got the overarching starting, and then it's like, here's the policies, and but it's all contained in one. So if you're a councillor and you want to, take all that in, you start your new term or whatever, it's sort of all sitting there. You don't have to go scratching around in different places to find the whole. So I don't know if that was the intention, but to me that would feel like a helpful way of doing it.
Yep. Okay. David?
Yeah, look, I concur a lot with what Vicky's just said, and I think it would be a little risky to have a code of conduct over here and the policy over here. The policy, in my mind, would need to be an appendix of the code of conduct that was able to be reviewed at any time, so that if you are referring to the code of conduct, and a lot of things will just be straightforward and specific, but if there is an item that within that code of conduct that needs to be expanded further or be more descriptive, there could simply be a comment in the code of conduct for specific points on this code of conduct, refer to the appendix item, whatever. But I certainly wouldn't like to be seen to be having to have a ferret around for other documents to get clarification on what you are actually referring to in that code of conduct.
Yep, clear.
I think my understanding is that this is quite narrow, this policy. It's around how we communicate to the wider community about our work, really. It talks about, in the introduction, the opportunity to make comment about information in our work and core services and express views, which is slightly different to things that the Code of Conduct covers a much broader aspect, which is our behaviour and respect and all that stuff. So, and if I go back to the comment Dion made, so in one way, that to me, I have no problem with this being a majority vote on a policy on a specific aspect.
Just in the sense of, I guess, the code of conduct, the advice or the best practice advice from LGNZ is leaning or moving towards not having that the code of conduct is your behavioural, what you agree to as the way you conduct yourselves, and getting less out of all of the mechanics and the detail of things like media policies and all those sorts of things that can make the code of conduct quite confusing as both a document and a process. So by having the code, we can hyperlink to all of the relevant policies as you work through the process of the code of conduct, and likewise, the code of conduct will also sit alongside your handbook as a counsellor, which is what you receive when you first become a counsellor, which has all of the council relevant policies contained within it. So those things do need to sit side by side, but part of what we're bringing in the sense of the code of conduct is trying to get the simplicity of the process for that supported by the relevant policies.
Yeah, Grant?
One of the issues for me, and I said that last time, that it all seems overly controlling about what we can and can't do. One of the things that I just noted that I'm thinking about in terms of an assurance paper and how a counsellor and corporate policies are made, this is going to become a policy, a corporate policy, out of the control of council, effectively. The Code of Conduct is a councillor members document. If we are to be easily change this document over time, surely that this policy should be a councillor-owned policy. Is that so? The front piece of that says that it's the policy owner is the director, governance, and CE. Is that is it quite clear enough for us that it is a councillor-owned policy?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly the intention, is that this is a council policy. There is an equivalent staff one, which is coming through behind. So once we know, what guidance you're giving us on your policy, then we're looking at the staff one, because from ARC, you might have seen the schedule, there's a social media and a media policy for staff, for example, which are corporate policies, which we're reviewing and doing a similar thing, making it guidelines within a public statement policy for staff, which will come through behind, but that will be managed by staff. This is absolutely, definitely a council policy that council will review and council will own. So we could change that owner. I mean, it's got Lisa down at the moment in terms of who'll manage that process, but we could equally well put the chair and have it managed to make it really clear that this is a council policy. It's for holding each other, yourselves accountable, if you like, for who can say what and how do you keep each other safe, how does the organisation help keep you safe, etc. in that space. So it's, yeah, definitely council policy. Yeah.
I've got a few more councillors that want to. David,
Can I just add
respond?
to what Taff was saying, because it may answer Dion's question around the 75%, as we could look at, because it is a council-owned policy, changes to the policy requiring a 75% majority. We could look at how that could be built in, because it is a governance-owned and it relates to the code of conduct. So that may assist us.
So I've got councillors that want to speak. I mean, I do have some sympathy for making it an appendix, to be honest, because I do think that solves the whole issue. I think it doesn't complicate the code of conduct if it's an appendix, because it's a separate document, but at least it's in the same place. And of course, that then means, I mean, we've said here that it can be reviewed at regular cycles, but so is the code of conduct. It's meant to be done every time. Every term, so I think that's the most appropriate place for it. That's just my personal opinion, but happy to take other comments. So I've got John, Joe, Peter, and Ian. So just go around that way.
Thanks. Before I get into the stuff I don't like, I have no difficulty with having a standalone policy that sits aside, and it can simply be in the code of conduct. It says reference Appendix X for this policy, and any infractions of that policy can then have it noted that it is referred back to actions within the code of conduct if there are infractions. So having the policy sitting aside with an ability to amend it simply, I think, makes sense. But as long as we have that connection going, this is from code of conduct, and the issue comes back if there are infractions. So I'm happy that we might do that. You don't want any wider debate at this point?
Oh no, I think we'll get to the policy later. But yeah, so let's carry on. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite happy with the staff approach here, because the code of conduct is a legal document that's quite particular. It's got rules around it, particularly the supermajority that's needed to amend it. And having an appendix really will, I assume that would mean that this document would need a supermajority to amend if it's that associated within it. And it's very common practice to have a plan and then a policy beside it. We're going to go through that process with the RPTP quite soon. So I'm happy with the structure.
Peter?
Yeah, I am too. I just wonder whether we're overthinking this a wee bit. I mean, the policy really is a guidance, and it's an agreed guidance that we have, and I don't think we've had that written down before. We've had an informal agreement about, and we've relied on a code of conduct to actually go to, but it's pretty tough going to a code of conduct on some simplistic matters, and I think this is a good opportunity for us to to do something. Where it sits, you technical people will put it in the right place, I'm sure. But I think it's an opportunity for councils and incoming councils even to have a look at what that policy is. And so they've got a really good first few steps of guidance in terms of what the responsibilities are and who can do what and who can't. So I'm happy.
Ian?
Yeah, I'm happy with the policy to sit outside the code of conduct. But what I got a bit confused about is in the next couple of slides, you talk about code of conduct draft wording, which looks like a fair bit of the policy is going to be in the code of conduct anyway. So I don't agree with some of the draft words in that, but I would be interested just if you could clarify that perhaps.
I think the draft wording's about the connection between this policy that's potentially separate or an appendix and what's in the code of conduct. It's just the linking words between them.
If it's restricted to that, then I'm comfortable. But in fact, it actually talks about if you talk to anybody, you've got to tell everybody that you talk to them, and a whole lot of other stuff, which seems to be proposed to sit in the code of conduct rather than in the policy.
It's because it already did and does minimise the words in the code of conduct, but you still need a bit more because it's complicated. Yeah, but yeah, I think that's what I see there. But Greg?
Slightly off track. I'm just wondering, are we streaming this? Is this a public... It is? Great, thank you. Kia ora.
Cool. They're all public unless they're noted as
that's what I was alluding to. So no, it's good.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Cool. Yeah, I don't know if we're real clear yet, everybody. We've got some people that are pretty happy to see it as a completely separate with the linking words, and some, and I'll come back, and some that are sort of keen on the idea of an appendix. So anyway, I'll go to Genevieve first, and then I'll come back to you, John. Genevieve.
I feel like it's a little bit clunky. Code of conduct, policy and guidelines. Policy is filled with guidelines. Basically, it's a raft of ideas in which to guide. So I don't understand why we've got policy and guidelines when it's pretty much all in one thing. We could have code of conduct, policy, and then a means of not guidelines as such, but maybe steps of understanding or some sort of they're just much of the same thing.
The current code of conduct has guidelines in the appendix at the back. So there's already a bunch of them, because you need them because there's a whole bunch of issues in there. So
yeah, but the policy should direct that.
And it does.
If it's written, no, but you don't need both. So I mean, it's much of the same thing.
Yeah, I think they serve different purposes, so that's why they have different names. That's what I think. John?
I was just thinking, and I'm marginally confused, but we did shift some of our revenue and financing out of long-term plan considerations to allow us to make adjustments along the way, rather than having to wait over time and consult with the community to adjust a figure from $100 to $150 or the like. And I guess I see this in a similar vein. It still ties back, but it allows us the ability to make shifts and move without significant formal processes.
And I think that sits, if it's in an appendix too, to be honest. That's my own view, because you don't have to adjust the words in the body of the code of conduct. But I think Dion's raised a really interesting point about the supermajority thing, which is why I lean towards an appendix, because then at least when that's done, it's clear. Or, like you said, David, you could put in the policy that this policy requires a supermajority to amend it. So either way, I'm happy. I just think the point about it all being in one place is sort of important too, but understand technology allows us to have hyperlinks and stuff. Just when you get a paper copy or whatever. Anyway, I just think that's important.
Chair, if I can suggest, because we've got the Code of Conduct workshop next week, we can begin that with, or within that, have a conversation about the structure of the document and how it's brought together in light of this, so that you're able to move this conversation into the substance of the policy.
Sweet, thank you. Yeah, let's move to that, I think. So yeah, that's a good suggestion. So next week when we see the whole thing, it'll be a whole lot easier to understand, I think. Cool, thank you. Yeah, Grant?
You just on this, I mean, what I like the idea of the appendix to the one doc. So you got one document here. Why do we need a policy? Why don't we call this thing just a guidance, an appendix guidance to making public statements?
I don't think.
Does it need to be?
I don't think. Let's not debate the semantics of like policies and guidelines, but I think they're useful words to help us, work things out. Yeah. Yeah,
but it's doing the same thing. This is a guidance document about how to and just why did we need the word policy?
Yeah, okay, let's not go there. Let's just go to the next bit about the actual policy itself. I mean, all policies are words to help us people, whether they're called policies, codes of conduct or guidelines. I just think we're trying to get a logical structure to how they fit together, which I think we can get there. But let's look at the actual words, because that's important. So let's move on.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and exactly that we're just trying to frame it into some kind of structure. But what we can do is bring back to you then the elements of the structure, the code of conduct piece that you'll completely land, then this piece, and then the guidelines, and then that can be a final conversation with council as to how that all the pieces fit together. So this then was what we were proposing could go into the code of conduct in this section. So there's sort of a part one to this section, which is the sharing of information between yourselves. And then the part two is the bit that sort of refers down to the policy. So these next two slides. Take on board what Ian just said, because I don't disagree. I think we need less rather than more in here, because that is the point. But there is some complexity and there needs to be, I think, enough information that it's clear what we're talking about, because the code of conduct is obviously how you are agreeing to hold each other account. So there needs to be a sufficient amount in there. So what I've suggested with Lisa is that we drop this text in And then when council is looking at your code of conduct as a whole, you can decide, is there too much in this section or enough? Yep, and how we link through to the policy or appendix or whatever that the other piece would be. So if you're happy, Craig, I'll just move on. Yep.
I think so. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I mean, seeing it all in context is way easier for us.
Yeah. So then in the policy document itself, we got some feedback at the end of last year that there was authorised roles of spokespeople wasn't quite the language that you were using with each other, and that they were in fact sort of agreement between councillors to who would be speaking on what. Reflecting the organisation's position once it's been agreed. So there was a little bit of feedback on that as well, that any public statements and things need to be the organisation's position. But obviously then there is that tension, which is the last bullet point, around views ahead of a decision, which might be your personal views or those that you've had in conversation with your community members that you're bringing into a decision. And so there is then just that caution around for councillors to be aware of, not something for us to write necessarily into any documents, but just around where you need to be aware that if you're leading into a decision and you're offering sort of personal views up, that you might be looking like you're predetermined and going into a decision meeting or something without open mind on something. So the question here is, do the policy statements as we've now got them reflect how you'd like to hold each other to account for what is said by representatives of Environment Canterbury?
Cool. So look, I know, Claire, you sort of started us off earlier on with your suggestions about moving the purpose and that, so thank you for that, and I've noted them down. I'm sure staff have. I didn't have any disagreement with that. Any other comments on the actual policy itself and the words in here? Yeah, John, and then I'll come to you, Vicky.
I guess I just in reading the policy and then you go back, okay, tell us is supposed to come back into the organisation. I really have great difficulty with that, and many times it's a question of advice and go, well, that's the issue. You're right in it. There is no way out. Just take it and suck it, or go, that doesn't seem so right. I will make some representation to the organisation and ask for a review or bring something forward. I'm not advocating for the absolute. I'm just bringing information to council on behalf of a constituent. So I guess a bit of the Free Speech Union. I'm not a member, but I feel constrained by the way we word things. So absolutely, if I'm speaking on behalf of the organisation, no difficulty at all. But I get a bit torn. What is my role as a constituency councillor, and what can I speak on? Because the issues that are brought to me in my rural and provincial are different issues that get brought by folk that come out of an urban environment, or a different side of the debate, whether it's the fish and game conversation of yesterday, forest and bird conversation yesterday versus an irrigation collective. So how do I have a free and frank conversation? How do I articulate the views of those constituents that come to me? How do I have a view of where I believe things should be travelling? I feel really constrained by the way that we are wording the conversation. I just don't feel as if I can legally go there because I'm constrained and can't say anything. I am not speaking on behalf of the organisation. You've asked me a question. I'll give you an answer as a matter of fact as I understand. So I just have a real nervousness in the information I receive and my ability to correspond with the community. And as much as Greg Byrne annoys the hell out of me with his letters to the editor, I will defend his right every bloody day of the week to write that. It will really piss me off and your Facebook page, but for me, that is the freedom of expression. And if you are wrong, let the weight of the bloody rules come in and whack you and seek an apology or whatever. But just sharing different views out of different constituencies or your natural biases, for me, I think that's the reason we sit at this table. Otherwise, we're this bland blancmange, cross our arms, we are the council, we protect the council, we say nothing. I have real difficulty with that, and I'm not looking to take the council down, but I want a freedom to express the views that come to me out of my constituencies and the values.
Can I just make the distinction? Thank you for that, because this bit back here, which was the sharing information, which I think was the first point that you made around if you're hearing something, what obligation do you have to bring it back into council versus hearing that? I think we'll cover that in the code of conduct conversation when you're seeing that as a whole. So the point of the public statement policy is to enable speech, but in a safe and consistent way. And so that's the tension that we're trying to work through now. So but that piece will come back as the whole. Yep. And I think you're exactly right. And last year's conversation, there's a lot of grey in there around when you're talking on behalf of constituencies and when you're just trying to gather information from, you've got to have a conversation to gather feedback and then what you do with that. So, but that first piece around speaking in confidence with constituents, that will come under the code of conduct piece as well.
Yeah, I've got a lot of agreement really with what John has just said there. And like for me, it feels like we're only expected to put the position of the council. And I sort of read the bit policy statement 2. So it says any statement made by councillors on any platform where they can be identified as being from Environment Canterbury should reflect the organisation's position when such position has been agreed. So, I could take that first bit and go, that's fair enough. If there's been a decision made, we put that there. But I don't see why we're then constrained in then saying my particular perspective is because but because there's this follow on in that point 2 that says it's therefore important that the people who know the position are the ones to make comment. It's like that's the piece that's then constraining who can say something about the position and further on down there's discussion or point of some of the reasoning behind this stuff in terms of wanting us to have like public, something about receiving input from the public opinion, and part of that gaining public opinion is about putting maybe some different positions, and different councils have their own different positions. We then get informed through comments sometimes on Facebook or whatever else that helps us to sort of either go, I've got some agreement there, or I can see the point of that different position that makes me think differently. And also about actually, if we're standing again for election, that people have gained a sense of who we are and how we represent them and what debate we bring, albeit we might not win every debate, can still sense who we are and what and make that contributes then to whether people might want to vote for us again or go, actually I thought they were this person, but actually I've discovered that's not the case, and I'll vote for somebody else. So I just feel like there's creating an inability for the public to actually understand who we are, what we think, why we do, and how we then formulate and I agree we have to be respectful, and I agree that we need to be really clear about what the council position is, and I think it's really important that we are very aware of not twisting people's other councillors' words and everything else, being quite genuine in reflecting differences of opinion rather than trying to I think there's that's about common decency but I think there needs to be some trust in us as ethical human beings, and I know it's that difficult thing of making sure that if people are being unethical that's cool, because that's unhelpful for everybody and the organisation. But there's got to be some trust.
Vicky, look, I think we're just going to carry on because we've got 10 minutes, but let's carry on, everyone who wants to speak, and let's just make those statements, because I think if that builds, I think that's an important point, and be specific like Vicky is really important. Like that second sentence in number 2, like let's have a real think about that. Do we need it? Maybe not. And there might have to be some more statements in there about it is okay for councillors to make opinions, etc. So make it positive as well as constraining. Yeah. Joe.
Look, I broadly agree with the policy, and I see the feedback that's been taken on board. But just following on from Vicky and John, I think still there's an element of the afterglow of the Commission coming through this document, in that the dial between operations and governance, for me, just slightly needs to come back towards governance. And I see that particularly in the oversight paragraph around it states the Communications and Engagement Group holds overall responsibility for overseeing and managing media engagement, relationships and responses for Environment Canterbury, but that responsibility stems from the political authority of the council, and actually in particular the political authority of the chair, because in viewing ourselves within a democratic system as being an executive in a democratic system usually has dedicated communications departments and press officers. So you'll have a press secretary that speaks on behalf of the president or the prime minister, and so on and so forth. And as you go through different departments, there'll be press officers that handle communication. So rather than us being spokespeople for the organisation, the organisation and its press people, our comms people, are rather spokespeople on behalf of the council, because it all comes back to the conversation that we've been having in this term. It's around what is the Canterbury Regional Council, which is us. What is Environment Canterbury, which is a brand which has evolved, which has its place, but is sometimes referred to. And then finally, the people, our constituents, because the beautiful thing, every 3 years, it's not media, but in a sense it is, where the feedback system is an election. And we come in here and we govern, and media isn't legislative. There's no laws that govern a council's media management. It stems from this council and it stems from this seat here.
Genevieve, Grant, David at the moment, maybe others, Dion?
My comment with this, just regarding the word predetermination, I think that is probably getting confused with somewhat of a preposition. I think it makes it like, just because you're representing your community and you have a voice for your community does not put you in immediate place of predetermined mindset. I think we need to be very careful with the wording, because you are able to have a preposition on something with an open mind, and go into a meeting and make a decision that changes. And you can still actually openly say, this is how I feel at the moment, and I have a position on this, and we have a position on this as a community. So I think that wording is, you have to be very careful in how you place it within something. Yeah, so that's my opinion.
Thanks, Genevieve. Look, I think the way it's worded in here is saying just caution, which I think it's almost like guidance, but yeah. So I take the point. I agree. I think we'd all agree that, of course, you have your positions when you come in of what you've read, what you've heard from your communities, but when the debate's on, that can change for sure, and that's the way it should be. It's just if we come out and say categorically, I'm doing this, no matter what. I mean, and that can happen. Yeah.
So you can't represent the community and be predetermined in the same statement. I mean, it's.
I think the predetermination thing is in the Local Government Act. I'm not sure where the words come from, but there's something in there, so it is a real thing in the law, I think. Yeah. Cool. I want to keep going, sorry, because other people want to have a say. Let's go to Grant, David, and then Dion.
Just quickly, I'm same as John. I think it's overly overly constraining, the whole thing. But I want to refer you back to the workshop that we had on the 11th of September last year, and councillors had raised some issues since November 2023 workshop. And there's a page there which says it all for me, and it's like we haven't been listened to. One of the key things, the bullet points, is restrictions around making public comment as an individual councillor seem overly limiting. Councillors should be able to express personal views publicly as long as they state those views do not represent the council as a whole. And then it goes on to talk about restrictions on social. So the bullet points on that particular document, to my mind, are missing, and they've been missing since 2023. And they were really good. It specifically says concerns raised by council. And anyway, I'd like you to have a look at those and see if you can incorporate them. And that that statement I've just read out may actually, if that's very clear about process for us as councillors, then it kind of addresses what John's saying and Vicky and myself and
I mean,
others.
in a way, policy statement 1 says that, but it's the other way around. So I think that you could have a policy statement 1 that starts with that, Taff, that goes, councillors are able to make comments, blah, 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 as long as it's not on behalf, and then you follow up with the current number 1. So it starts out in a sort of positive way and says, councillors are, pretty much those words that Grant had there, like start out like that and say that's important role of democracy and being an elected member, but then say basically what we are sort of agreeing with is that if it's an Environment Canterbury statement, that it's got to be by the agreed people. I think no one has a problem with that. Yeah, that could be a way to help get through this. David, Ian, and Dion.
Thanks. Look, I concur entirely with this previous conversation about members expressing a view, but noting it's not the policy, the position of ECAN. Great idea. I want to come back a little bit to sharing information and the question of where members who are offered information on the condition that it remains confidential. I struggle a little bit with having to disclose that to council, and I would probably ask on the reverse, if council receives information, staff receive information, are they obliged to divulge that to us? And I've had so many instances where I might have passed over some information and it's been used in a manner to actually counter what I'm trying to achieve. Similarly, recently we were asked to, I think it was a Lagoima request to hand over information on a particular subject, written notes, and anything that we had accumulated in the discussion of that particular activity. I have no objection at all to official communication by email between members as being available to the request. But when it comes to my personal notes that I might have been scribbling about a particular activity, there's no way in hell that I'm ever going to hand those over. That's my private record of what I've been thinking about in the meeting, and I think it's objectionable to actually ask for that sort of information to be handed over. So just a little bit of tweak I feel is needed in that sharing of information regime, and I think we need to look at that a little closer. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, David. I don't know if that's referred to in the policy, but yeah, good point. I don't know where we reflect that, and I don't understand the law on that either, but that would be important. We just need to keep going around the table. Ian, and then Dion.
Briefly, I agree with John and Vicky's plea for being able to have open dialogue with our constituents, and David actually said pretty much everything I was going to say. But just to add to that, in terms of the sharing information stuff, you can't have rules which you can't enforce, and this is an unenforceable rule, and so by the nature of it, and they're talking about is it proposed to go into the code of conduct. It's a proposal that you can't enforce, in which case it makes it a particularly stupid proposal in the first place, because if you can't enforce
what words are you referring to?
The fact that you've got to disclose, if you're having a confidential
back on that
discussion, where what does it say? If you have if you're having a discussion in confidence with somebody, we will then inform the person that we will have to disclose that such information, and then we will have to disclose it to the governing body. I mean, if I have a private conversation with somebody, I'm sorry, it's going to stay a private conversation, and I'm not just because it may or may not have something to do with that's pertinent to the ability of the council to perform its statutory duties. I'm not going to necessarily disclose that. So I object to a proposal for a rule that would suggest that I do have to when it's an unenforceable rule in the first place. And it's worse than that, because it leaves you exposed to somebody accusing you of having a conversation when you're not going to talk about it anyway. And so I'm very uncomfortable with that as a proposal.
So that's going back to that word there, so that needs to be looked at.
And can we pick that up in the code of conduct conversation that Lisa can pick up, and also the Lagoima Act requirements in terms of disclosure? So that could be a good conversation looking at Lisa to pick up when we bring the whole code of conduct back. Thanks, Ian.
Dion.
I agree with a lot of what's said, especially with Vicky, what you were saying, and I do want to agree with what Councillor Robinson said around predetermination. I have a lot of conceived views on things, but I'll always come down and sit on this table and have an open mind and listen to my colleagues and make a call. And I don't think that that's very fair. And so that was the one thing that I did highlight in the in number 4. However, once a matter is due for council decision, appearing predetermined on a particular predetermined position on a decision, I'm not sure that that's really what was intended in the way that that's written. That's just I understand it's a cautioning, and I understand the organisation is very risk averse, but we're politicians and we're kind of in a different space in that way. The only other thing that really concerns me with this document is in our social media guidelines. And I've just lost the spot here, but you were talking about crikey. It was talking about any information as Environment Canterbury information. Sorry, I'm flicking through this document and these screens are so small, it's ridiculous. Yeah, all communication with Environment Canterbury over social media channels is subject to the Public Records Act 2005 and also considered to be council's records. Really? Is it really council records?
That's referring to communication with us, so on our official channels. Yep, we can be obliged to share that information under Lagoima and things as well. So that's not your.
Okay, so I think that needs to be a bit more clearer, because the way it's written there, it sounds like it's any communications that we have becomes. Yeah, because you're talking about our page being council, a part of the council brand in a way, and then you go down and say that any communications on that page, that's the way I've read it anyway, is council record, and I'm like, no, it's not.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, like being clear about, the official ECAN stuff, that ECAN comes out with the logos and all that on it, versus, because when you go back to the front of this, who does this policy apply to? Councillors and committee members, and governors. So it's really important that anything that relates to it clarifies that if it's an official ECAN thing, I think that's really important. Yeah. Cool. Right. Yeah. Where you go, John?
But yeah, very briefly on the predetermination, when Megan and I took the Fair Free trial to the world, we were on national media and radio. Was I predetermined when we came to a conversation at the table? Yeah, because we developed a policy and taken it to the world. Similarly with Vicky's notice of motion around the nitrate testing. You don't bring a notice of motion and then say, but I've got no predetermined idea when I come to the table. So we have to be really clear in what predetermination is. The working groups that Vicky might want to put together, a bunch of councillors bringing some policy thought together, by the time you've reached that point, you've got an idea where you're going. You are predetermined. So we just need to be careful on what predetermination does genuinely look like if we're developing and bringing a policy to council, because you can't not be predetermined if you've developed a policy.
That's where it's really specific, and there's a recent court case that proves the difference between predetermination and predisposition. So that's the clarity we need in this document, because we can't be labelled with predetermination by just coming here and having a voice. Yeah.
Greg?
Yeah, thanks. I really don't have too much opinion on this at all. I think I operate in a way that I feel very comfortable without putting the council into any position, and quite And with John, I absolutely agree. Whatever you have to say is whatever you have to say, and that's cool. What I would say is there is a very good piece on the Office of the Auditor General on predetermination, very short piece, which could do as a rider when you are, if you're referring to it, which is basically saying we all have opinions, we all have whatever, and you're allowed to have those thoughts and go into stuff. But when you're sitting down, you got to, in theory, have the open mind. And if you're swayed, you can swayed. If you're not, you're not. But and it's a really good piece in there. Okay.
Can I just add to that? No councillors
back to be determined. So, I think that's important in the context too, that it's only, and who can bring a code of conduct? It's only another councillor. That's correct. So it's not a member of the public. They can make a complaint, but they can't raise a code of conduct matter. So ultimately, that's why we need to be a bit clearer. Like, this is not an external thing happening to us. This is within us. So, yeah. And maybe that is, those words there are more guidance. So put them in the guidance maybe rather than a policy. That could be an idea. But I know we're not real clear, but I think there is a general feeling in the room that it needs to be that positive affirmation that we are elected members and we need to be able to speak for our communities and have opinions. But I think backed up by the stuff that there's processes within the council that are important too. And we don't want to confuse people. We don't want to give out false information, which I think is important because, yeah, you're entitled to your view, but if it's intentionally malicious or whatever, that's different. And I think that's a code of conduct matter right there. If you see that from another council, then you've got the right to then bring that up as a code of conduct matter. That's the point. So I just think we've got to be clear on those things. So hopefully that's been helpful, Taff, and you've got some good feedback to help bring it back to us.
Yeah. Thank you. No, that has been really helpful. So what we'll do next, because I know there's a couple of other slides here, but they were things that we'd covered reasonably well last time, I think, in terms of the role of agreed spokespeople, but essentially it's as broad as we've already just discussed, that it's on any local constituency issues. Of course, you'll be the people speaking, and then working out on a bit of a case-by-case basis, depending on what it is that we're dealing with, whether it's a core service lead, regional delivery, whether it's the chair, whether it's local. And in many cases, it will be all of the above. So that's the bit that and this, again, as you said, Craig, this is between yourselves, this policy. So this is holding each other to account and having mechanisms to work out. There'll be grey areas and we'll get it wrong from time to time. But in terms of elevating it up to Craig and Dion going, okay, we've got this matter, who would you recommend would be the spokespeople? Some will be really obviously staff, some will be very obviously the chair, and then there'll be a whole lot of grey in the middle as well. So, but it's, again, mechanisms between yourselves to work that out. That's not for staff necessarily to be coming in and saying who should or shouldn't around this table. That's for you all to work that out. And then the last bit was the guidelines piece. I've got some feedback on that too. Sorry, the harmful communication wellbeing piece, which we covered last time. And then the number of guidelines in here as well that we can change as best practice changes, as platforms change, as councillor direction changes. They're relatively easy to fix. And I put a couple of other tools just on your tables, just as examples of the sort of things that we could provide you with. So the coloured one is something that staff use in terms of how we will respond to things on our social media channels that come in that staff are monitoring. They may be useful to you as similar sort of broad guidelines to yourselves, but it's not a council tool, council or tool, it's a staff tool. And then the other one's the sort of thing that we can do in terms of just flow charts once we're starting to work out, where different items might be going. So no feedback required on those. They were just some examples. So thank you. I think we've got some good feedback to bring it back as the whole package as part of the code of conduct piece. So.
Thank you. Look, I know you want to make a comment, Grant, but we're well over, and we're coming back to this next week. So, let's have another discussion then. Thank you. So we'll go. Thanks, Taff. Let's go straight into the next one. Sorry, we're a bit late. So we've got a big update here on our public transport work program. So welcome to the table. Well, we've got Sonia and.
I'm shooting through. I think my phone up.
Oh, right, and my blood pressure will rise. Just for you.
Okay, Sonia, let's go. All these councillors getting.
Thank you very much. I was going to say good morning. Are we still good morning? Yes, good morning, councillors. We've got quite a few updates to go through, so we're going to take the presentation as read, and really we're here more for any kind of questions, areas of clarification. So I'm going to skip through to the first one. So starting 2025 with some good news. We do have funding approval for the trialling of the turn up and go frequency on Route 7. You'll see there that we've got a start date of the 28th of April. So we've worked with operators to look at what's the earliest date we could get this in. We will be focusing a really good comms plan with the community to get their buy-in and obviously make this as successful as we can. It's important to note that we've got the funding agreed for this cycle, so the NLTP 2730, which essentially means we've got the funding until June 2027. NZTA is working on some new national criteria, so once we've got that through, that will be used to evaluate this improvement. And then what we'll look at is, that means either in the next funding bid, we'll look to put it through as part of the continuous programme, or it may mean that it needs to stay as an improvement for another 3 years.
From Joe?
Just in light of the last conversation, I'd love to be involved with the comms plan around the release of this. Thank you.
And I've already spoken to Taff about this, and just we want to make sure that we have some form of formal event to kick these things off, because we've given a pretty hard time to NZTA and to the Crown about their NLTP and funding, and we really just want to sort of also celebrate those successes with them, because we need to make them look good as well.
Karen?
This is just bringing back the high-level overview of a review, and Council asked just to kind of see what the high-level kind of findings were. So we conducted a high-level review of two recent trial routes that both had different outcomes. So Route 86 is the Darfield to City, and then Route 87, which was the South Bridge to Lincoln. Route 86 was a really successful trial that's now moved into our continuous programme. Strong usage, and we've seen strong patronage growth. In fact, at the moment, we do know that we're actually struggling with over-demand on that route, a good problem to have. Route 87, the South Bridge Leaston, struggled to reach those patronage targets. It required a really high subsidy to keep running that route. So essentially, that was removed from the network. So that trial was closed. The high-level findings support a lot of the research that we've done previously, which is the need for a route to have a really clear use case, i.e. a clear start and finishing point. It needs to be a route that people find useful, and it needs to go where people want it to go. The route needs to be attractive, so those comparative journey times are important, particularly to the car. And the route needs to be reliable, so that does rely on, a lot of the PT infrastructure, the PT priority, bus lanes, and PT priority at signals, to really ensure that we can keep that reliability going. So as part of the annual plan, we're going to have a new framework considered for new service requests outside the Greater Christchurch, so really outside that PT Futures business case. So these findings will all flow into that framework to allow us to kind of have that development of what is the criteria we look at when we consider a new service. Sorry, my voice is quite croaky. Any questions on that one?
I guess just a question on the 86, and I've sent in a piece from Mayor Sam, and I'll get an official response. But yeah, just interested in how can we, I guess, ensure that we do uplift, and we've got people interested, and we don't want to leave them standing on bus stops and then deciding that they'll continue in cars or whatever. So and we don't need to celebrate in the media the Leaston Southbridge Christchurch one. I don't think that'll do me any good in an election year.
Yeah, we do know that we've got a number of areas on the network where essentially we have over demand, which again, this is the kind of problem we want. The challenge we have is being able to find the funding to respond to that. So we are looking at any ways that we can in terms of what's the funding availability, double deckers, how else can we get something into the system? But it's a challenge at the moment because we have no clear way of being able to fund additional capacity.
And I note the way we're looking at the uplift in the cost or the pricing and out to Darfield as being more expensive, but I do note that we've got about a 21% fare box recovery, which is one of the better ones we have around the place from that Darfield route. So it's, yeah, we're sort of where we sort of need to be and heading in the right direction. So it would be sad if we can't sort of continue that in time.
Just quickly, does the government's new private share figures, how does that impact on the ability for us to deliver this if the percentage public share, increases substantially?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And we're still working through the nuance of what that means at the moment, because obviously this is quite new. When we're thinking about the private revenue, we're looking at a network. We don't normally get down to route level in terms of what that looks like. However, we are expecting that when we do put through and this new evaluation criteria that we talked about for Route 7, we're expecting to see that come through in terms of what is that private revenue that's been generated. So there will be expectations around that. And obviously, anytime we add some new improvements onto the service, it has a cost. So we'll need to consider what that looks like from private revenue.
Thanks. Keep going. Sonia, thank you.
Cool, thank you. Okay, I'll flick through those slides. This one was just a quick reminder, really, which was following a recent review by MOE. There was the removal of the Temuka to Timaru MOE service. And the rationale behind that was because there was actually a public transport service available. So that's part of their criteria for funding. That became unfunded in February, essentially this term, so February 2025. Amazingly, the Aoraki School Transport Network have been able to kind of reroute some of the existing bus networks. So at the moment, we're not seeing any issues on that. We were expecting some issues in terms of not having enough capacity on that public route. We've been reassured at the moment that everything's actually working really, really well. Really lucky that they could pick it up with extra capacity in the other bus routes. But if I kind of go to this slide, there are additional routes that are potentially under future review where that may or may not be the case. And just as a quick kind of reminder, as part of the long-term plan, Council did resolve that no additional funding would be included in the long-term plan to fund additional service capacity resulting from MOE route removals. So if we do see some of these route removals, we'll have to look at actually how we can accommodate that on the existing network.
Yesterday in the committee meeting, the school bus runs were the third worst performing routes in terms of the cost, the subsidy cost, which is about $22 per trip. Per person. I don't fully understand the way that these school routes are funded. Are these ones different than the ones that were funded in what we were talking about yesterday in that performance measures?
Yeah, so MOE specifically runs some school routes. So they have in fact, they're the third largest public transport authority in terms of just the volume that they have. They run it where there isn't a public service available. We have a separate school routes. And the idea is that helps support our network so that it doesn't become full of school children at peak capacity, for example. So that's what the additional school route is to do, is to remove the school children, because obviously it's quite an efficient way to move them and still allow that capacity for others to be using the network. So we have, how many school routes do we have?
Off the top of my head, maybe 12?
12.
Could be wrong.
Yeah, so we have specific school routes that run from, they normally service a couple of schools as well.
I wasn't aware of that. I thought MOE was funding. Yeah, this is interesting because the subsidy on those are quite high per person. Per person $20 odd. And they were getting $1 odd back because they're school students. So I'm not saying that we should be looking at getting rid of those, but we actually need to do this better somehow. And I don't know what that conversation is, but when I saw those numbers yesterday, I was quite concerned. And now that I'm hearing that all of these other school routes are going to potentially be on the chopping block from the Ministry for Education, if we're going to be upping, services at a $20 per person per ride subsidy, the budget will go backwards pretty quickly.
the 12 ECAN school routes that we have, is that
so that we remove the school children, because if not, you just wouldn't have any capacity on some of these routes. So it's kind of to assist the network to function well.
I know Stuart's got a comment, so Stuart.
Kia ora, thanks, Craig. Just to clarify from the dashboard from yesterday, the school route subsidy is $11 per trip at the moment. And this is why the fares policy and pricing that you set as council is very important, because while we want to encourage young people to use the service, if the price is too low, it impacts on the viability of the service because the cost doesn't change. And ideally, we would prefer to carry adults on our core networks because they generate more income to offset the cost of the service. But of course, a large proportion of our community is young people, and we need to carry those as well. And the school buses are cheaper to run, but we generate less revenue per seat because they are school children paying a school fare. But they are not, as Sonia said, in any way related to MOE school services. They are urban school services. MOE don't do school buses in urban centres at all. So all we're doing is augmenting our network to take, as Sonia said, take pressure off the main network.
Although the Temuka example is a little bit different. I mean, you probably wouldn't call that a school route at the most, not one of the 12, but it's become a school route, hasn't it? And all of these examples here of where, especially Waimakariri is growing, so the urban, is changing. So, yeah, it's an interesting space and something to be really aware of. So, Vicky?
Just logically, these routes where they are essentially supplementing one of our lines because of the fact that there's a lot of adults and kids all wanting to use public transport at the same time because school, office and so on all start around the same time. Really, in terms of subsidisation, we should be considering those in the collective, because essentially what we're doing is compartmentalising the kids onto one bus. So of course that's going to collect less revenue, but if you distributed them across all the other buses and actually potentially make them less attractive for the adults to be using because it's crowded and busy and the bus is slower picking up lots of people, then you sort of essentially all you're doing is spreading your subsidy number might look better for the having taken out the school bit, but your other bus service is going to look less good because you've just put those all into there. So I think we've got to be careful about going, oh, well, that one's got a high subsidy, let's chop it. If actually its purpose is to make the other part of that network route work really well, they're actually collective. Don't compartmentalise them. I think it's important to be aware.
Yeah, and I just note I feel like a little bit uncomfortable saying we kind of preference certain demographics. We're a universal public service.
I think it's just something really important to be aware of, team. So thanks for bringing it to us, because obviously the way you did the Temuka process is, have we got enough capacity when they come? And so I think that's obviously you're highlighting that, saying, are those routes that cover these areas going to be able to handle it? And I'm assuming you'll come back to us with some ideas about either no, it's not, or yes, it is, and if it's not, we might need some more funding. Yeah, so I get it. Cool. Genevieve?
I still have concern about appropriateness of transport, especially when you're carting school children around, and knowing that there's standing room only in some buses. It's the safety aspect that worries me. So I'm hoping that there's some data on how much extra would be required for not just an appropriate size bus, but for something that accommodates the safety of young children, or passengers full stop, but children in particular. So do we have that sort of in there somewhere too? Extra.
So are you asking for what would be the cost to prevent people from standing?
Well, yes, and in particular, I was just looking at the data on the Temuka run, but for everything, yeah, it's just extra, not just the transport itself or extra bus service, but appropriateness of the bus service. You know, if you need a double decker or whatever, but if it has better safety systems in place for passengers going at 100 kilometres an hour, how much extra would it be that's required to up our safety for travellers on those out of boundary routes?
Yeah, so we don't have any to hand. We'd have to do the work to understand what the cost would be around that.
Yeah, I'm assuming that these are now those like rules and guidelines around, because I read that in the Temuka thing too. So you're allowed to have standing passages. Yep. So there's rules and guidelines about how many you're allowed and how long those journeys are and how fast the buses goes. That's what it's based on.
Yeah, so every bus is certified to carry a certain number of seated and standing passengers, and there's more if they're children, less if they're adults.
Yeah. So that safety stuff that Genevieve talked about is contained within those certifications, I'm imagining.
Yeah, ultimately from an NZTA perspective, it's considered safe to load your bus to the capacity that NZTA have specified, which includes standing passengers.
Cool.
Does it also include speed?
We have asked NZTA that question directly, and they've come back and said they simply don't have a position on that. So their position is that there is a loading certificate on the bus, and that allows X many standing passengers.
Cool. Thank you. I mean, it's bigger than us, Genevieve, but good point that you've raised. But obviously that's a whole process of certifying buses on routes with NZTA. So but good that you've raised it. Yep. Vicky?
Just curious, the Darfield bus route, I saw the Darfield bus go past me yesterday. It was a double decker. And I'm wondering, does that play into the cost effectiveness as well? Because we often hear it's like the driver time and can be a big part of the cost. So are we looking at where or whether double deckers, we've got particular routes where double deckers would actually really enhance our cost effectiveness?
Yeah, we're actively looking at that. The economics of bus provision is really in the larger vehicles. So there may be some opportunities that there's always going to be a trade-off, because if we put larger vehicles on, then the only way we're going to save money is to actually reduce the frequency. So you're putting fewer higher capacity trips on, and of course frequency is a big driver of patronage. So there is a trade-off, but there are some opportunities out there that we're exploring at the moment.
Cool. Let's go on to the cruise ship. But thank you.
Okay, I was going to give a quick update on cruise, and particularly wanted to pause on this slide briefly. So in a nutshell, we're past the peak of the season. We're on budget. We haven't had any complaints yet. So good story so far. We have been really, really close to the wire on some of the days when we're doing ticketing only. So this tends to be the mid-sized ships, maybe 2,000 passengers. And really, again, this is all about pricing. We're finding really disproportionate impacts on our network from some of these smaller ships that are charging much higher prices. That's the Holland and America and the Norwegian lines are two off the top of my head. We're finding one, if not, I'll move on.
Yeah, Vicky?
Really question, is that being communicated back to Christchurch NZ and to Littleton Port Company? Because there was very much before this, right at the very beginning of this season, that whole discussion around how do we make it easier, how do we avoid putting costs onto ratepayers, and there was a expression of, we'll do what we can and communicate early enough, etc., to diminish and minimise the impacts and therefore costs on us. And so I think this feedback would be really useful to go back to them. Is that happening?
We definitely will be doing that.
Greg?
Yeah, sorry, it's not a question, it's a quick comment. I was over there quite a bit Christmas, New Year. It was awesome to watch, actually, especially the larger ships and the way everyone was moving through. I thought it was well done. It was great.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, let's move on. Thank you. And hey, good news, but concern there too, just around that pricing. So thank you.
Okay, on to bike racks. I'm largely going to ignore the slides because life has been moving pretty quickly in the space. So really where we are still awaiting an NZTA response to the request for daytime running exemption that we submitted just before Christmas. So that's still a watch this space, and we're expecting that pretty soon. There's now a pathway for exemptions for vehicles with dual racks. Some of these will need lighting improvement, some of them won't. That all vehicles will need an exemption to be able to use bike racks moving forward. We are on the cusp of getting a solution approved by NZTA for our triple racks, all of which will definitely need lighting improvement. Where our operators are in the process of assessing their fleet, so we know for one operator about 25% of the dual racks will need lighting improvement. Obviously, we already know the triple racks are all going to need improvement. The other operator, we think, a much lower proportion of dual racks will need improvement, and that's just different fleet. In terms of timescales to get back up to 24/7 and kind of normal bike rack use, it's really difficult to pin it down at the moment. We're still in the process of understanding the full extent of the issue. Once we get to that, we need to go through procurement, we need to go through design of brackets specific to our racks, fitting, installation, etc. So to roll this out across a fleet, and a fleet that operates 18, 19 hours a day, is going to take months. So I mean, we just need to be really realistic about that timescale. We're quite a few months away from resolving this, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. We do have a way to do this.
Great news. Stuart put his hand up there. There you go, Stuart.
Oh, thanks, Craig. I just wanted to be a bit provocative on this topic, if I may. What Derek's just outlined is a journey that involves a significant amount of elapsed time between bike racks being unavailable and bike racks being available. It involves a significant amount of resource investment across most PTAs in the motu, and it involves a significant investment of capital across the country to retrofit lighting, etc., to buses or racks. And so you add all that up and you get quite a significant cost impost on an existing service footprint to maintain a capability that we've had for 15 years. Where an alternative might have been for NZTA to simply issue an exemption for bike racks on buses, and then we could have just carried on.
Thanks, Stuart. It's real. Like, I didn't realise.
Have a role to play.
Oh, sorry, you were still speaking. Sorry, you might have cut.
Yeah,
out.
I was just going to say it's a significant example of where government has a role to play in influencing the cost footprint of public transport, and therefore the private revenue share ratio that we're expected to deliver. So joining those dots, the costs are going up, and we're going to have to find more revenue to offset that cost when there was an alternative that NZTA could have taken. Just wanted to make that point.
No, point well made. Thank you. But really great news in some respects that there is a pathway there now. Obviously, our exemptions in for the daytime stuff, which is really good as well. Hopefully, like you said, watch this space. We'll hear back from that, and to know that the work is going on to see how we get through this. Joe?
What would happen hypothetically if we just directed the operators to reintroduce the racks?
We would end up in court, I think, would be the answer, because our contracts require them to comply with the law, and it's very clear through this process that the use of bike racks currently does not comply with the law. So I think we'd be facing a protracted court battle, which would probably take a lot longer than going through this and equipping the fleet.
Vicky, and then I'll go to Dion.
Are we putting out on, I mean, this is public briefing, are we going to put that out? Because that's a useful summary that we've just had of where we're at right now. And I think there's just so much desire to know, even if it's, and the reasoning. And, I think it would be really helpful to put that out publicly if we haven't very recently, because we're getting a lot closer. The other thing, which is, I know this is me going off on a solutions thing, but with like the bike racks themselves, some of them are really like they've got much more clunky to use over the last few years. Like they're really hard work to pull the things out you put over the wheels and all the rest of it. So I mean, these if there are racks that need replacing, is there not an opportunity to actually incorporate the lighting into the racks and maybe consider, if some of those are coming to the end of their lifetime, do the two together? Because just some of them are definitely not easy anymore.
Yeah, we're looking into those things at the moment. So and as part of reinstatement, we need to do some tidying up across the network. So, for example, this has been particularly difficult for us because we have 4, maybe 5 different types of bike racks out there right now. You look at Greater Wellington, they've only got one type of bike rack, so they only need to do one solution, one test, where we've got a lot of work to do. So there will be some opportunities we'll be trying to take to just even up the field and look at some of the maintenance of this, because as part of our testing, we've seen some pretty poorly maintained racks out there. So yeah, we've got a bit of work to do in that space.
And in terms of that, the comms bit that Vicky mentioned, is that something Joe and the team, is that something we can do? Like get some, what's that? Yeah, but is that something we're going to...
We'll take it back to the comms team and go through that.
Thank you. Dion, did you have a question?
Yeah, no, my question was exactly the same as Vicky's around the comms. I mean, I get asked this almost every single day, and I only just put up a post yesterday or the day before, which has attracted quite a fair bit of comment, just pulling together the information that I had, because I got sick of people asking me the question. Well, not sick of it, but it's just a lot of people asking. The only other question I had was for Stuart. Do you think there's any further work or role that we could potentially play, maybe me and Craig, around the advocacy to the central government potentially around the issue, or are we sort of too far down the track now?
I feel we're too far down the track now, Dion, with this particular one, but I do feel it's a good example to keep in your pocket for influencing government on trying to be pragmatic and realistic about solutions. That seems to be the flavour of the day now. And this is a good example where that could have been beneficial.
Yeah, it'd probably be good to get a write-up of the whole thing once we get to a final solution and do some lessons learned. I'm sure NZTO would like that too.
Cool, let's keep going.
Finally, for me then, very briefly on the orbiter. Sure, we've had issues with lack of reliability and bunching for quite a while on the orbiter. So we've done a bit of work, partly on the operational management and partly tweaking timetables. The downside is it's too early for me to give you a result from this because the traffic patterns are all over the shop over Christmas, and we've had some pretty major diversions. So in a month or so, we'll know whether it's worked. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is improve stuff without significant investment.
Is there any work that we can work with the City Council in terms of the infrastructure, turning lights and signals and other parts that work with the operation? No, not the operation, the optimisation of the network?
There absolutely is. And we've just started a project with Christchurch City Council to work on exactly that, which is looking at where are the kind of hotspots on the network and therefore what are the infrastructure responses we could do. So that might be things as basic as cross-hatching, which can be really useful for turning circles. Where you have on the road where it's crossing, cars are not allowed to go onto that space so that the bus can turn round. Yeah. So something as simple as that, which is road markings. Then we're looking at the potential of bus priority at intersections. So looking at your light phasing to allow the bus go through. And then it obviously increases to your larger scale infrastructure, which is your bus priority. So we've just kicked off a project now to work together and look at actually what's the main areas that could benefit from that in terms of across the network.
Just on that, at some stage, maybe it would be useful to get some of that back to us, so that if there's anything that we can influence in the council's annual plan process to sort of bring a little bit more of this into the play, I'd be quite keen to help on that. So that'd be
people, the public, what we're doing on that. Just that I've been at a stop before where Orbiter's gone past and adjacent customers are going, what? And then I can go, but I know what that's about. But obviously it'd be great if rather, most people I won't be stood there to explain. It would be good for people to understand what we're doing and trialing and why. And I wonder if we could put into something that goes out about that, just how great a route it is, because it really is brilliant. But also when it works really well and the timings work well, because when you're connecting with another route, of course, that's where it gets tricky. If that's why it's really essential that this is optimized. So I think recognizing that to people, that we recognize that, and this is what we're doing, and this is why you might see a bus go past you, but know that there's another one maybe just 2 minutes behind, and this is why. I think that would be quite helpful.
Really good update, thank you. I think that's no, we've got one more.
Kia ora koutou. Just a brief update on the NTS pilot on Route 29 and how that's going. So I'll take the presentation as read. From our perspective, it's been really successful. It's achieved its core purpose, which is to test the underlying technology and the solution itself, make sure that money's flowing through into our system 100%, which it is, and to test customer engagement with it. And we're really happy with, we're stoked actually with 25% of the people noting that it's only available for adult customers, but still 25% of people on that route are using contactless payment cards to pay for their travel. It also allowed us the opportunity to to test our, it served as a mini deployment, so test some of what it will look like to deploy when we deploy elsewhere, and waka kotahi in our ability to support our customers with the solution. Noting, however, that we've had very, very few phone calls. It's in single digits, the number of phone calls that we've had related to it, which reflects that it's working very well from our customers' perspective, as you'd anticipate. We're continuing with marketing at the moment, but we're actually not looking at investing anything further in this at this stage, because we're focusing on Timaru and Greater Christchurch. I think what it does, we've done some analysis to see how are people using it on our network, and it's made no direct impact on patronage that we can see, noting that it's over a quieter period of the year. We have seen we can see people using it return journeys on a day, so circa 10 people every day are using it to go to and from the airport. So most likely that's early adopter commuters that are using the service. It's not connected to the network in terms of being able to transfer across the wider network at this stage. So there's no incentive for people to use it, as part of their everyday life, unless they are early adopters and also going directly into the CBD and back. So look, we're really happy with it. We've got some bullet points that we can circulate to council as well. If in terms of, the numbers, this talks about, I think circa 6,000 trips. Presentation was pulled together on the 19th of January when we had the stats, but it's now closer to circa 10,000 trips. Yes, I think that's it. We can share some of that. We'll share some points with you via the governance team if you want to share those.
So you just talked about, I think I heard 10 regulars that go out and back. So the rest of the 25% basically tourists that are arriving in? So it's been used quite well by the tourists? Yes, it's primarily, it is by tourists. Yeah, people new people to the city, new people, yeah, non-Cantabrians.
Joe?
Your microphone, Councillor.
Just trying to understand on this. So that's all payment methods, including cash.
So just to talk through that, so if 100% is all payment methods, so of that 100% of all payment methods, including cash,
25% of people are paying via contactless payment cards, and the other 75% are paying via cash or Metro. Or so what would normally be paid for on the rest of the Metro network, which is cash or Metro cards.
And then forward one slide, that seems like quite a high percentage of cash compared to what is there across the network, isn't it?
Yes, well, that's one of the. So that's always been a high cash route, Route 29, because we haven't. If people coming from landing on the airport, there's no Metro service agent there to enable to get a Metro card, so people will pay by cash, and it's one of the reasons why we chose this route, because when you. Yeah, so people are still. So it does. Yeah, so there are people that are still using cash. Yes, it doesn't. Noting that the and when we were. You've been out there. We were promoting on the buses, and the driver knows that it exists. It doesn't cater for children because you're charged an adult or any form of concession, so you're charged an adult fare when you get on. So there are, if people wanting the children to pay for their children, then they'll have to pay via cash. And some people choose cash because they've got cash they want to, for whatever reason they choose, but they want to pay by cash.
Yep, very quickly, and then I'll come.
So very high rate. Yeah. And I strongly suspect it was around 50% because we haven't seen any shift in MetroCard usage, as I said.
Yeah, probably that the contactless payments probably taken up the other half of that previous cash payment. Vicky?
Yeah, I was going to also flag that, looking at that graph, you can see that the cash payments is essentially equivalent number. If I'm reading it right, the lime green and the mid blue, one's cash, one's contactless payment on the bar chart at the bottom. And they're pretty much on a par with each other, which, is concerning if the whole point is you can do contactless, and that's where, is there a problem there in terms of, because we're going to be taking out the opportunity to use cash. So I think that's sort of a bit of a flag that we might be needing to think about that. Sorry, to then go to your point about people, and it was reminding me, I had this situation in London where I went to catch the bus with my kids and they have the tap on with your credit card, and they're like, yeah, but you can only use that you have to have a unique card each. And so the kids didn't have a card that was valid in UK, because you sort of signaled, I think, that actually that's a big part of the reason why people might be coming in and using cash in order to.
So we haven't done any. In terms of the purpose of the pilot, the purpose of the pilot was to test the core solution. We're not testing uptake of contactless payments. That intentionally is not something we're looking to dig too deep in. From a how customers will engage with, one of the reasons that we're going in Timaru prior to Greater Christchurch is because there's some functionality that won't be delivered in time to now enable companion travel. So for people to pay for their people coming with them with their car. So you'll be able to do that with the equivalent of the Metro card, the Motu Move card in the future state. So that will exist. But you're right, that each credit card or contactless payment card, that's one tap for one customer to get on the bus, as it is overseas.
But we're already thinking about that now, and there's a solution. And so that Motu Move card, they'll be available at the airport for people just arriving to then take that and make it easy.
I mean, I think that's the standout one on this slide. Like you said, it was a high cash route, but it's still a high, like around quarter that use cash. So, and that's not going to be available, right? We've made that decision. So that's the transition that's going to be important, noting that this trial wasn't about that. But obviously that's going to be a big conscious thing for all of us around how do we move those people off that cash, because they're not going to be able to do it. And we don't want to lose a quarter of our customers, right? So I know the solution will be the Motu Move cards, more available, lots more availability, but that's obviously going to be a challenge for everybody. Yeah,
look, it's a significant challenge for us, and as you can imagine, high profile on our change. And again, one of the reasons for taking a staged approach. So in Timaru, we'll test an element of this with a smaller cohort, what works, doesn't work, and then apply that to Greater Christchurch. But it's a key part of both our behaviour, customer behaviour change. It's a big part of that. retail networks, as you suggested, promoting contactless payment cards, and then also the overall transition with our customers. What are our business processes that we have to support customers, particularly in the change period of those that 2 weeks to a month during the go live period? Then after that, it's going to be really important. And Auckland Transport have been through this, so we've spoken with them and we're learning lessons on what that transition's been like for them and what our operational processes should be.
What is our average cash percentage on the network anyway?
I couldn't. It starts with a 1. I think is it 13% or 19%, something like that.
So it's not as high.
So Stu will know. Yeah.
12%.
12%. Okay.
12%.
12 to 13. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
It's not a massive as challenge as this one. Yeah, thank you. That's good to know. And you probably brought that to us when we made the decision about going cashless, but I just didn't remember. Thank you. Awesome update. Has anyone else got any questions? Grant?
Just quickly, did the trial include assessing the tag on, tag off stuff?
No, it's just tag on. So we didn't want to confuse our customers with only one route where you have to tag on, tag off. So it's only tag on.
Awesome. Like that's 35% of the adult trips. That's quite a massive change, like really quickly. So awesome update, and the whole update really good. Thank you. Lots of meaty topics that you guys have been dealing with, and just congratulate you for all the work you're doing to try to solve some of those things that have come up. Cruise ships, bike racks, as well as working on the small to move thing, which we should always remind the government and the country and the community that we're the first ones trialling this. We're the guinea pigs. We're working really hard on it. So thank you, team. I appreciate all your work. Kia ora.